Hello, everyone. My name is Joseph Wong, and I'm the General Manager for Open Legacy here in Asia. Today, I'm going to tell you a story of a CIO for a fictitious bank. Even though it's a fictitious bank, however, I'd like you to use your imagination to follow along because some of the encounters of this CIO are based on real events that we've actually encountered with real-life customers. Meet Beth. Beth is the newly hired CIO of Acme Bank. Today is her first day on the job. Well, not exactly the first day, but her first real day, because she will be presenting to the board about the future of the company. So Beth starts presenting, and unsurprisingly, the conversation goes in a very specific direction. She talks about digital transformation, but the board members on the technology committee wants to talk about one thing and one thing only, the mainframe, and how fast can she get rid of it. So when you say digital transformation, you mean mainframe migration, correct? Asks the chairperson of the committee. Yes, answers Beth. Legacy modernization, to be exact. As in shutting down the mainframe, right? Asks another board member. We have to get rid of the mainframe. It's so old. Well, yes, eventually, answers Beth, but it's going to take some time, and we will need to support all the digital initiatives the bank has in the meantime. Of course, sums up another board member, we will gradually migrate away from the mainframe while supporting the digital initiatives as she suggested. Everyone approves. So Beth gets to work. There's certainly a lot for her to do, and she knows she's not going to do a simple lift and shift or a single event migration, and certainly not just rewrite everything. Instead, she chooses a gradual approach that makes sense. Some replatforming, some rewriting, and some automatic COBOL to Java conversions. She understands that everything starts with mapping the as-is, architecture, and dependencies, creating application bundles to be processed, creating the different integration patterns to accommodate for the decoupling of applications and data. That's quite a mouthful. And the planning phase is long and requires a lot of legacy skilled resources, but it's foundationally and fundamentally important. In parallel, of course, a different team is planning the go-to architecture, choosing the cloud vendor, and digital technologies on the cloud. After the planning comes the implementation. The team starts to work almost on all the global resources in the company are now devoted to creating the integration patterns and web processes. Beth wants to streamline the work of taking a COBOL program from the mainframe, decoupling it, and converting it to a microservice. Her teams build automations and interfaces. They're also investing in educating the developers on the proper principles of API design. She restructures the IT department to work as guilds and agile cross-functional teams. She also hires developers and DevOps to set up the cloud infrastructure and automations on the cloud. The first major obstacle comes in the realization that defining what a digital bank should look like is more challenging than expected. The business side is less helpful and decisive than she expected in terms of what they will actually need to support. Everyone has an opinion, but no one is committing to anything. Eventually, Beth accepts the recommendation of the working team to adopt the Open API standard. It will probably enable her to support future needs, but the problem is that she will need to redo some of the interfaces and digital services already implemented for the last 6 months, especially since her legacy assets are not, of course, currently Open API compliant. The second major snag is the realization that while they are working on their planning and implementation, the rest of the world have quietly moved to streaming APIs, not just RESTful ones. This shift to event-driven architecture can really risk her project, but she puts her best people on the refactoring of her data architecture to accommodate. It's a major effort, but she feels like she's back on track and is much more comfortable with the decision. After 18 months, Beth is called back to the board. She knows her teams were hard at work and is excited to report the results back to the board. But unexpectedly, The meeting takes a turn for the worse. We're a bit concerned, opens the chairperson. Beth is surprised. It's been 18 months and we didn't really see any of the new digital initiatives launched. We're perceived as being behind, adds another board member. Well, says Beth, I understand what you're saying, but keep in mind that this is a major infrastructure overhaul. It takes time, but we're making great progress. Okay, we can work with that, says the chairperson. Tell me, how many lines of code have we moved to the cloud? The papers love to measure lines of code. Well, we actually added thousands, says Beth. What? Speak up, I didn't quite catch that. We actually added about 5,000 lines of code to support the coexistence patterns. As you can imagine, this wasn't a good board meeting for Beth, and she was given a new mandate to find a new job for herself in another bank. But fortunately, the job market here in Asia is quite good, so we wish her the best of luck in finding the next job. But no, wait a second. Beth is the heroine of the story. We cannot let the story slide like this. So let's rewind. Today is Beth's first day on the job. Well, not exactly her first day, but it's her first real day because she's going to be presenting to the board with the future plans of the company. She gets a marching order in the board, which of course is to get rid of the mainframe. This time, Beth starts her planning knowing some key points. She plans the migration and the patterns, but she also uses flexible technologies to help her model and refactor the legacy estate. She employs three main concepts to help her. First one, she removes her dependency as much as possible on the legacy team so they can focus on keeping the lights on. Instead, she pushes a lot of the onus to the digital team, using technologies that are state-of-the-art and solutions that can actually help the digital team do some of the things that the legacy team were doing before. Then she makes sure that the same cloud-first tech methodologies are used throughout the stack and for the teams. And finally, she makes sure to work in small, achievable, continuous iterations. So making sure that we're tracking small milestones and celebrating those milestones as they go along. Based on these approaches, using cloud-first technologies that free her team to focus on getting things done instead of building more and more infrastructure. Her team is now focused on implementation of new business logic and refactoring what's needed. All the decoupling and integration patterns are out of the box, and specific deployment method is just an afterthought to be decided upon. When Beth understands that she needs to implement the Open API standard, it's no longer a big deal for her because all the contracts are already available and she just needs to rewire her composable components. When the need to shift to streaming architecture arises, all she needs to do is just regenerate her services to support that. Also very simple. But most importantly, Beth is now free to support the bank's initiative immediately using whatever backend is available at the moment and to shift later to a more modern one. After 18 months, the board meeting now looks very different. All the board member has seen the digital initiatives already deployed and some workloads already moved from the mainframe to the cloud. Beth is celebrated. I hope the story of Beth resonates with many of you because this is what we see with some of our banking customers all across Asia. There are three takeaways, generally speaking, and the first one is to make sure that you do not overload your legacy team because already they have a big workload in terms of keeping the lights on, which is probably the most important thing for your business at the moment. But having to overload them with additional initiatives and work will only make things worse for a team that's actually dwindling. What we see out in the market is the skill set of mainframe development, COBOL developers, RPG developers is actually getting less and less. People are retiring, they're getting to retirement age, so it's actually very hard to find a replacement for these resources. Instead, what you need to rely on is more on the digital side. The digital teams that are available coupled with the latest technologies and solutions, will help you achieve some of the effects that the legacy team can also provide. That's one. The second thing is using a cloud-first approach is very common nowadays, even with banks. When they're on their modernization journey, retiring some of the mainframes and some of the legacy systems, things like AWS, Microsoft Azure are now being mentioned more and more. And we fully agree that this should be the direction that many banks should take going forward. And finally, because these modernization projects are multi-year projects, the horizon is very long. And so you need to have carefully planned milestones along the way that you can easily track, but at the same time, when you reach those milestones, they can actually be celebrated, because you need to continue to keep the morale of the team high and ensure that there's continued support behind you in pushing forth these modernization initiatives over a horizon of multiple years. But what technologies can actually help provide such capabilities? How can you deploy in an agnostic way? How can you get out of the box decoupling and integration patterns? Open Legacy can help. Essentially, Open Legacy is an API factory platform that allows you to do a few things really well. First of all, we can create APIs in bulk en masse. And second of all, we can create APIs in bulk in a very efficient time manner. So time to deploy actually improves. The third thing is when it comes to cost control, we can do it very well. These are basically the characteristics of any factories. And when it comes to API factories, these results are actually much more pronounced. It's important for you to see in the diagram that the bottom layer is the core data legacy layer. We call this layer legacy mainly because it's got technologies that have been around for 20, 30 plus years. And it's not just mainframes or mid-range systems. It's actually your databases, whether it's Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, or core banking or insurance applications, or even ERP if you're in a different industry. And then, of course, there's the SOA XML protocols that have been around for some time as well. With Open Legacy, we sit just above this layer, which allows you to build a direct connection between these legacy systems directly to the digital services. And it's important to note that we sit just above the legacy system, so whatever we do is actually non-intrusive to these legacy systems, and you don't need to, again, burden your legacy resources with additional workload. But the platform actually is essential in doing three things. First of all, we generate microservice-based SDKs and APIs. And then we allow you to use either our low-code or full-code solution to extend the functionality of these APIs and SDKs. So if you need to add additional business logic or IT logic, such as authentication, exception, and error handling, you can do that with these. And finally, we allow you to manage and maintain these SDKs, APIs, reuse them in different projects, and to deploy them into different environments, whether it's on-prem, behind the firewall, in the cloud, like AWS, Google, Azure, or some sort of combination or some sort of hybrid in between. And it's important to know that these APIs and SDKs actually will serve banks with the open API standards or insurance companies with open insurance standards, and of course regulations that are put in place by various governments. We also wanted to highlight that based on over 80 customers globally that we have, and we work with some of the biggest banks and insurance companies in the world, there's some average statistics that we wanted to present. First of all, when it comes to time to creation, we're normally 10 times faster as opposed to traditional development. And we are 75% cheaper when it comes to TCO, total cost of ownership, because we help bypass a lot of the middleware, whether it's the hardware, the software, and potentially the labor involved as well. And finally, when it comes to performance runtime, we're also 5 times faster, again, because of bypassing a lot of the middleware monoliths. Our software is very flexible. It allows you to also include DevOps, DevSecOps, and to manage any phased migrations along the way. With a few customer examples that we can share, but I think today we'll just share two that I think are more relevant in this case. First of all, Shimane Bank in Japan, which is part of the SBI Holdings Group. They came to us initially because they needed to better their customer experience on the internet. So on internet banking, on mobile banking, they wanted to do a lot more for their customers. And so we used our solution to expose a lot more logic and data from their mainframe systems, mainframe CICS, to the internet browser as well as the mobile phone of their customers. And of course, there's similar P2P payment systems or solutions in Japan, like what we have in Hong Kong, the Alipays and the PayMes. And they also needed to facilitate P2P transactions for that particular application. So they came to us to also help them by exposing a lot of the logic from the mainframe to that particular app as well. It's also worth noting that these guys are looking to now deploy more and more of their functionalities on AWS. And that's why with our latest solution, we can actually help them make the migration, make the move to the cloud much more easily. Standard Chartered is another marquee client of ours in Asia. And this is actually a bit of a migration story. The bank is doing a regional migration of their core banking system from various vendors to a proprietary written solution within the bank. I believe this is actually a very brave move, by the way. And their planned horizon is 3 to 5 years for this to happen. Where Open Legacy comes in is, even though they're migrating from the old, they still needed us initially to ensure that the business and the lights continue to be kept on in a very well maintained manner. And so what we did was we built better integrations between the old core banking system with its peripheral systems to ensure that the lights are on. And when the new system comes, we wanted to also continue to build the integration between the new system and its peripheral systems as well. And overall, for Korea, last year they went live and it was a very successful showcase. So you can actually Google us online and be able to see the some of the success that we share with Standard Chartered Bank in Korea. Just a little bit about Open Legacy. We've been around for 9.5 years. We're dual headquartered in Israel and the US. In Asia, we're a little bit less tenured, but we still have 2.5 years. And over the course of the last 2.5 years, we've actually won quite a few logos in the region as well. As you can see, we have Standard Chartered, Shimane Bank from earlier slides, but we also have DBS, WeLab, Commonwealth Bank, and when it comes to insurance companies, we have MetLife as well. Thank you very much for your time. If you have any questions or you'd like to learn a little bit more about our company and our solution, please visit our virtual booth.